Chronicles fiction. Sons of Rasputin. A Day in the Death. Flames, the screams of the dying, the once proud city of Zurich, stretching out into the distance, its dark and beaten walls providing shelter for the foulest of demons. Thunder cracking open the black sky. The deep bellows of the war beasts. Baden grimaced. This was it.
Almost time,
Otto said to his right. His friend's voice sounded like that of an old man. Maybe it was just the rubber and metal of his gas mask, or maybe it was all the pain and death he'd seen in the last 8 weeks. 2 months at the siege of Zurich. It was almost a record, and a good 6 weeks longer than the average life expectancy for a Perusian Cossack at the siege. The 13th von Kuppel Regiment was renowned for its high mortality rate. Already, Baden had been promoted to a commandant. His friend serving as his second, Baden smiled weakly. They'd enlisted together back in the spring, back in old Prague. A lifetime ago. Beneath him, Baden's rivet bowl tensed its powerful legs in anticipation of the coming charge.
On my command,
he told his men. Baden closed his eyes and saw his beloved Anastasia once again. She would be back in old Prague with his son, waiting for news of the campaign. When he had received his commission and told her that he was going to be sent to the siege, she had cried for 3 full days. The siege was also called the Death. Few returned alive, and those who did were scarred forever. It was something he knew only too well. He fought back memories of his father and opened his eyes to look down at the plains before the city. The ground was solid, the recent warm spell drying the mud. He could make out fallen weaponry scattered throughout the field, echoes of previous battles. Without warning, the image of his father's final moments came to him, his corpse lying in the mud and blood 11 years before. The commandant had visited Baden and his mother personally to inform them, to tell the 5-year-old child that his father had died a good death, a hero's death. Right now, with the cries of the dying before him, Baden wasn't sure there was such a thing. Death was death. More thunder echoed through the sky, but this time it wasn't from the heavens. He glanced back to see the huge cannons firing from the hills. The barrage lasted for a full 5 cycles, smoke and dust covering the field before him. As it settled, he could see the Dark Legion still marching. Dead were scattered everywhere, limbs and corpses blown apart under the cascade of fire. His rivet bull growled. The twin-headed eagle banner flew high in the air above them, the standard bearers ready to charge with them into the maelstrom. The flash of a gun came from the base camp, the order to attack. Baden raised his saber.
For the Tsar,
he roared, as the Cossacks began their charge down the rise into the bowels of hell. For what seemed the longest time, there was only the sound of war. Baden's rivet bull pounded into the undead legions, but for every Dark Legionnaire he killed, 2 more took its place. Worse still, some of those injured continued their attack. Oblivious to the gashing wounds torn into their undead hides, Baden's saber ripped through one to his left. Without changing the stroke, he removed the head from another. Before him, he could see the gates of the city slowly opening. More of the enemy marching shambolically into battle. Behind him, there seemed to be an entire legion of undead. He had no idea how he had managed to get so deep into their ranks. Otto was still close by his side, blood spattered over his cloak and plumed helmet. His left shoulder pad was smashed, and the arm under it a bloody mess. Somewhere in the distance, Baden heard the horn signaling a retreat. A faint smile crossed his face. There was no way they could retreat, not through the mass of undead between themselves and the base camp. He caught the eye of his friend, an angry and bitter look there. To his side, a soldier, even younger than Baden, clutched the Rasputin battle standard, firing his machine Krieger into the undead. The young trooper's rifle clicked empty as Baden watched helplessly. The soldier caught his eye as gunfire from a Dark Legionnaire tore through his body.
I heard Fleischmann was sent to the Winter Palace,
Otto roared, forcing his rivet bull to Baden's side. There were just the 2 of them now. The 2 of them and a whole legion of undead warriors.
I would have liked the Winter Palace,
Otto coughed, blood coming from his lungs.
I would have liked it very much.
His friend pulled the mask from his mouth, tossing it to the ground, blood seeping from the corners of his mouth. He didn't have long left. Only the rage apparent in his eyes was keeping him alive. Baden looked up towards the huge gates of the city. They seemed to beckon him, the gates of hell. He gave Otto a mournful smile and motioned towards them. His friend nodded wearily.
One last charge into the death,
he whispered. Baden sheathed his saber and took out his second Heisperfer gun. Pulling the reins back on his beast, he made one final charge toward the gates, remembering the old commandant's words.
Your father died well. He made it into the city with a whole regiment of Cossacks. The damage he caused, well, his actions could well have changed the course of the whole campaign. You should be proud. I should be proud,
Baden whispered to himself, a red mist clouding his vision as his rivet bull passed the standard-bearer's corpse. Without pausing, Baden grabbed the battle standard. Cannons roared from the hillside, a final salute. He was close to the city gates now. For some reason, part of his mind told him if they could reach the gates, they might be all right. They might survive. His Heisperger spat death wherever he directed it, each bullet into one of the attacking corpses. By his side, Otto swung his saber like a man possessed. This was their death. The only thing they had left was an ability to kill, or rather to destroy those who were already dead. The gates were so close. A final blast from his gun, and they were there, galloping through like heroes from an old legend. Once inside, Baden pulled the reins back on his rivet bull and looked around. The city swarmed with the undead. It was a necropolis, a dark citadel of the damned. Once proud buildings were charred mausoleums for a long-lost people. The streets littered with bone and blood. He could smell their decay, their hunger even through his mask. Otto let out a cry from his side and slumped forward on his rivet bowl, the flesh of his back ripped apart by a legionnaire's bullets. Baden picked the creature out and let loose his own volley. The creature blew apart under the onslaught of shells just before the chamber clicked empty.
Don't,
Otto coughed. His voice was just audible above the sound of the approaching legionnaires.
don't let them claim me,
He sputtered as the life left him.
I won't,
Baden promised, making one final decision. Even though his death was on him, there was no way they would claim his corpse or that of his friend and turn them into one of their own undead legion. There was no way they would do unto him what they had done unto his father. He grabbed the reins of Otto's rivet bow and pulled the beast close to his own, removing the pins from Otto's anti-personnel mines and then his own. It was time to blow open the gates of hell.
for the Tsar.
Unsheathing his saber as the legionnaires started to grab for his body. The mines exploded. It was the last sound he heard, thunder cracking open the sky, and then nothing. Nothing at all. Mutant Chronicles Fiction. Sons of Rasputin. A Day in the Death. Mutant Chronicles Fiction. The Templars. Blood. The Lutheran settler didn't have time to signal the alarm. He died instantly. The dart from a deadly Templar impaler almost cutting him in two. The gendarme, known as Cavour, stepped over the corpse, his face cold and emotionless. From behind came the heavy breathing of the prophets and the whispered chanting of the horde troopers. They were preparing themselves for battle. The chanting was kept to hushed whispers by the horde centaur, who was carefully building their battle fury. The other centaurs were following his lead. While the horde was not large, it was more than enough for the mission. Somewhere in the cursed Lutheran settlement below were 3 of their own, captured by the Lutherans when they had been collecting tithes from the nearby village under Templar control. Cavour's mouth twisted into a growl. His brother Louis was one of the prisoners. Louis had always believed the lesser races could be brought into the Terra Nostra, re-educated to become vassals of the Empire. He was too soft for his own good. Cavour knew the truth. The goddess had told them all the truth through her signs. The lesser races had to die. A few chosen ones could die honorably as legionnaires, fighting against their kin alongside the Templar, but die they must. Only when the Terra Nostra covered the whole world would peace be achieved. The steady purring of a prophet brought Cavour back from his musings. It was time. Over 100 troopers, including the gendarmes and legionnaires, awaited his signal. The Bestial's huge prophets were baying hungrily, the scent of death heavy in the air. The legionnaires would lead the charge, a distraction for the Lutherans until the Templar cavalry swept down the hillside. It would be a swift and merciless attack. It had to be if their fellow Templars were to be saved, if his brother was to be saved. Cavour motioned with his hand and sent a silent prayer to the goddess. The next instant, chaos inflamed the small Lutheran outpost. The sight of the legionnaires rushing towards the settlement set the alarm ringing. The bell summoned Lutheran soldiers to arms, but even as a few sought weapons, they were overwhelmed. Cavour gave a second signal, and the cavalry entered the fray, the gendarmes alongside them. Even from this distance, he could scent his brother. He was somewhere inside the compound and scarcely alive. The scent of death and fear was everywhere, and, coupled with the chanting from the horde centaurs, increased Cavour's rage 1,000-fold. The Lutherans didn't stand a chance. A couple of farmers were running for the false security of the settlement. Cavour raised his impaler and pressed the trigger. Darts ripped the humans' pathetic bodies apart. A blade flashed to his left, but Cavour ducked underneath the sweep and pressed the trigger of the impaler. A dart sent the Lutheran flying back through the air. Flames were already claiming some of the buildings as he entered the settlement. A dying Lutheran struggled on the ground before him, two huge purgers clawing and biting through his flesh. Cavour scanned the turmoil, trying to pinpoint his brother's weakening scent. Walking carefully through the heart of the settlement, Cavour's impaler claimed more lives as the Lutherans tried to stop him. It was a hopeless fight. They were outnumbered and outclassed.
Bazin!
Cavour yelled, seeing one of his kin virtually disemboweled by a Lutheran blade. Cavour fired his impaler at the creature, but the dart had little effect. Blood was seeping from the wounds on the Lutheran's hands and feet, red tears streaming down his cheeks.
A demon,
Cavour whispered to himself.
Truly you are an enemy of the goddess, to stain her earth with your foul blood.
Cavour fired again, still no effect. The monstrosity was close to him now and raising his blade for an attack. Cavour unsheathed his own blade, a mighty sword of destiny, and brought it clashing down into the Lutheran, almost cleaving him in two. This time, the Lutheran remained still. The scent of the smoke and death was concealing the captives. At least Cavour hoped the smoke was masking his brother's scent. If not... Cavour caught sight of 3 crosses at the far end of the village and screamed. They were too late. Far too late. He moved slowly forward, ignorant of the carnage around him, as the few remaining Lutherans were rounded up. The crosses were barbaric things made of wood, each with a Templar hanging upside down, nailed savagely to its hard surface. In the center of the 3 was his own brother. All were dead. Judging by the blood and open cuts that lashed their naked bodies, the deaths had not been easy ones. Other Templars were slowly moving to his side, waiting for his command. His brother had been the innocent. His brother had worked with the lesser races, even re-educating some, and suggesting that their souls could be saved.
See where your foolishness has got you, Louis?
The gendarme whispered to himself, looking through the smoke at his brother's corpse. The Vestals awaited a command. Cavour closed his eyes and cursed the pathetic creatures who sought to escape from Templar rule.
Kill them,
he ordered.
Kill them all, and raze their village to the ground.
Mutant Chronicles fiction. The Templars. Blood. Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, Crescentia, Martyr's Day. Screams. The ground shaking under the pounding hooves of the mighty Eclipse mammoths. The dank and desperate scent of blood, fear, and death. Lal Roshan of the Crescentian village known as the Fallen Moon moved to the side instinctively, allowing the bullet from the attacking Rasputin soldier to harmlessly pass him by. A loyal brother-bound trooper was on the infidel in an instant, his huge Eclipsean piercer cutting through the unfortunate Rasputin's body armor to the flesh below. Above, dark clouds roared their own menacing tune. Lal Roshan could foretell what was to come without using his skills as a prophet. Flash lightning. It could be the thing that could save his clan if it didn't kill them first.
By the first prophet's grace, I implore the sacred powers to give me the strength. I, Dar Doshan.
The prophet slipped into an ancient and long-forgotten tongue as he summoned the power from within. Across the ruins of the ancient city he had led his kin to, only death and violence could be seen. It was wrong. This was one of the holiest times. Martyr's Day. It should be a day of peace and silent prayer, not chaos and bloodshed. The infidels had attacked from the north with the dawn, taking the people of the Fallen Moon by surprise. It had taken little time for the Crescentians to don their battle armor and lead their beasts into the fray. The sun was now burning overhead, the air around dry and barren. The Rasputin cavalry were slowly retreating, preparing for a second charge. They had been forced back at great cost. The motionless forms of many Rasputin and Crescentians revealed the losses both sides had suffered. Lal ended his prayer and felt the power surge through him. He was now a weapon of the prophet. His deep-set black eyes scanned the battlefield to see where his power was needed. To his left, the Khan's guard were holding their position with honor. The Fallen Moon were fortunate to have such great warriors traveling with them. As the dead Rasputin soldiers by their feet testified, the Khan's guard were the best in creation. There could be little doubt that all were fighting with honor, but there was a nagging doubt at the back of the prophet's mind. The omens were bad. Blood was falling on Martyr's Day. Such a thing had not happened for 2 generations. The ancient ruins around them were catacombed with dark corridors, concealing untold horrors and secrets. Perhaps the prophet's dreams had been wrong, and the Fallen Moon should not have come through here. Perhaps the visions had been false, or worse still, the work of the Dark One. the ancient enemy of his people, seeking to doom them before they could prepare for the final battle. Yes, he decided grimly, the omens were very bad. It was a balance he would have to deal with. His blood and mind ached as one as the power flowed out of him and into the troops, granting the entire clan renewed strength. They would not run now. They would stand and fight, even if it meant their deaths, no matter what horrors the enemy sent their way. Weak from casting the prophecy, Lao Roshan dropped to one knee, supporting himself momentarily with his staff of the prophet. The world seemed to swim out of focus. The prophets were trying to tell him something important. The reason for traveling to the ruins. 2 mighty jihad warriors were by his side without his knowing. Their holy infuriators, blasting at the Rasputin cavalry, seeking to kill their leader.
My friend, are you injured?
Sergeant Borak asked him, helping him to his feet.
No, I am fine.
The prophet replied, the weakness of his voice betraying his true condition. He was still aware of the battlefield, but it was a distant awareness. The images were fading only to be replaced with others. Images of the city in its prime, powerful craft flying through the sky, healthy and beautiful people pacing the streets. His vision moved to a building, the words above the arched entranceway, in some strange and unknown tongue.
What you seek is inside.
A voice whispered from his side. La Roshan's heart stopped. It was his father's voice, a prophet himself, claimed in battle some 10 years gone, and now standing by his side and directing him to the building with a calm and compassionate smile.
You must hurry. There is little time.
His father said, fading away with the last of his words before Lao Roshan could ask any of the million questions burning through his mind. An explosion shattered the world before him like a mirror smashed into 1,000 jagged fragments, and he was once again looking over the battlefield.
Friend Lar, are you sure all is well? There,
the prophet said, pointing his staff to the ruins of an ancient building. Age and the Great Death had destroyed a wall and part of the roof, but Lao knew it was the one from his vision.
What we seek is in there.
His words were scarcely out of his mouth when the sergeant was ordering a group of Khan's guard into the building. They moved as one with the prophet. Close to the door, Lao spun quickly and directed his staff behind him. It charged with power as 3 Rasputins galloped toward them on the backs of huge and hungry-looking rivet bulls. Lao could smell their hate as the staff spat heat, all 3 going down in agony as their skin boiled and blistered. Backing into the building, Lao Roshan knew his visions had been true. Maps were scattered across the ancient tables, maps showing forgotten places of power and food. The soldiers knew what to do without being ordered and gathered up the invaluable papers. A Rasputin soldier burst through the door, only to be cut down by a fierce cry from Sergeant Borak's Veraciter.
Outside,
Lao ordered, the guard laying covering fire as they moved from the building. Halfway down the battered steps, the small group froze. as a troop of Rasputins broke through and galloped toward them. Too many to kill. Lau glanced weakly at his old friend Barak.
Martyr's Day.
He whispered.
A good day to join the prophets.
The sergeant nodded silently and gave his weapon one last check. One of the guards fell to the floor, half his head disappearing into a cascade of Rasputin gunfire. Lal prepared to die when thunder cracked open the heavens.
May the prophet watch over us,
he whispered, blessing those around him and bringing his staff up to block an attacking blade for the final actions of his life. Lal was prepared to die. When lightning ripped open the sky, the world froze and restarted at an agonizingly slow pace. The sergeant was firing and then falling backwards, bullets tearing through his muscular frame. Something hard and small struck Lal's left arm, and he glanced at it, only to see blood seeping from 2 bullet wounds. There was no pain. He turned his head towards the attacking troopers, just as the flash lightning came crashing down among them. One of the guards vanished in a blaze of pure light, along with all but one of the attacking Rasputin soldiers. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and burnt flesh. Still alive, the world lurched forward and returned to its normal pace. More lightning struck the ruins, causing a massive explosion. The Rasputins were retreating now, deciding against the continuation of the struggle. Lal quickly gathered some of the maps from the sergeant's dead hands. The ground vibrated, and Lal looked up, thinking more lightning was striking the streets, but smiled weakly when a huge eclipse mammoth caught his vision. Retreating Rasputins dying under the beast's massive hooves. Whispering another prayer, Lao sent the signal to his people to retreat. The time for battle was over. They had the maps. Now they must be studied to see where the next fallen moon would walk. As one of the heroes helped him onto the back of the eclipse mammoth, Lao glanced back at the carnage littering the streets. Many proud warriors had fallen this day. Later, when the time was right, they would retrieve their fallen brethren. Pyres would be built and their spirits sent to the prophets. They had died to help their brothers. There could be no nobler death. It was Martyr's Day, and the heavens were crying with Crescentian blood. The blood of heroes, the blood of martyrs. Mutant Chronicles, fiction. Crescentia, Martyr's Day. Mutant Chronicles, fiction. The Lutheran Triad, Kin of Ash. There had been nothing left of the settlement. every house and building had been razed to the ground. Even the church had been destroyed by the heathen savages. Kneeling by the remains of his kin, Gabriel touched the ashes with his fingers and closed his eyes. It was almost as though he could touch their souls. Almost as though he could hear their cries for vengeance. Gabriel looked up to Mirade. She remained on her horse. Her face could have been carved from stone for all the emotion visible there. She had left her own kin to be with Gabriel and those of the rot. Her brother Ezekiel had moved to this settlement, bordering Templar lands. That was the last anyone had seen of him. His death would not have been an easy one. The brutality of the heathen was renowned.
Company.
Mirade's voice whispered to him inside his head. Blessed with the silence by the cleansing, those of the Lutheran triad could communicate only by thought and signs, their mouths and noses sewn up at birth as part of their fiery baptism into the eternal struggle. Gabriel marked his forehead with the ash and rose to his feet. The sound of his army preparing for battle and the hungry growls of the approaching heathens made him know what to expect. The Templars had returned. He whispered a silent prayer. The others had still not arrived. Their force should have been far larger than it was. Something had gone wrong. Something bad. And now they were outnumbered. It is time, he whispered to the triad force he had gathered together. Climbing onto his battle mare, Gabriel Ash surveyed the burnt-out remains. Crosses had been erected all along the main path to the village, and on each cross hung a martyr, a Lutheran warrior who had died in battle. Some were little more than skeletons now, but their names still respected and prayed to during the days of the dead.
This is my last battle.
Mirade's voice whispered to him grimly. No one else could hear. The thought was for him alone.
I've dreamed of this battle ever since I felt Ezekiel's death. But know this, we will meet again in heaven, and I will always protect you from the darkness.
A single tear of blood moved down Ash's cheek as he reared his battle mare and unsheathed his helmor. He nodded at Mirade, his eyes smiling sadly. She was a patriarch, one of the few women to be so blessed, able to use the power of the Lutherans' rituals to see and feel what others could not. If she had foresaw her own death, then she would die, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it. Part of him hoped that he too would die after the heathens had been routed and the murder of his kin avenged. As the first sounds of gunfire cut from the sounds of hoofbeats and the hungry cries of the heathens, Ash had no more time for thought. There was only time for killing. The Templar force was large. Ash suspected it was far larger than the one that had destroyed the settlement weeks before. They seemed fresh and brutal, while his own men had ridden hard to reach the outpost, hoping to save their kin from the attack they had heard was coming, only to be broken when they realized they had arrived too late, and all were dead. Still, the hunger for vengeance pushed the Lutherans on. From his horse, Ash split the skull of a heathen, his helmor blade almost slicing the mockery of a human to his chest. Two of their foul beasts roared to his side as they leapt towards him and his battle mare. Easy, Joseph, he thought, steadying his horse with his knees, while blasting the beast with 2 quick shots from his faith implicator. The bullets shattered into both beasts, leaving their handler momentarily confused and alarmed. Without pausing, Ash brought his hellsword around, shearing the creature's head straight off. The battle was a strange and bloody sight. The Lutherans moved through the field like silent, avenging angels, bringing death to all those who opposed them. Mirade was struggling with one of the Templars, a powerful-looking heathen who seemed to be some kind of leader. They were equally matched. Until a Lutheran beast laid low Mirade's horse, sending her toppling to the ground. A legionnaire, one of the human scum that served the heathens, brought a blade down on her before she could move. For the first time in his life, Ash wished he could scream out loud. As it was, his mental cry cut through all the Lutherans on the battlefield. The anger and agony in his mind scream, pushing them to even greater heights of fury. Urging his horse on, Ash hacked a deadly path through the legionnaires, his blade claiming lives wherever it fell. His Helmor seemed too good for these scum. He was almost by the legionnaire, who had the eastern appearance of a Prussian. Mirade's killer looked up with baleful eyes. Ash pressed the trigger on his implicator, and bullets tore the heathen's body apart. The Templar Mirade had been fighting was still close by, pulling his blade from a fallen Lutheran. Fury consumed Ash as he raised his Helmor and urged his horse on. The Templar's own blade came up just in time to block a deadly downward cut.
Scum,
the Templar said in the bestial growl they call a voice.
You are not worthy to meet death at the blade of Cavour.
Another Templar entered the attack, taking Ash by surprise. The second blade shearing through his left shoulder. Pain shot through him, and he felt the warm wash of blood flow down his now useless arm. The battle mare buckled suddenly, and Ash caught sight of a Templar beast at his horse's hind legs, tearing at them with its savage teeth. He rolled off just as Joseph fell thrashing to the ground, the blade of the Templars just missing him as he landed. The impact stunned him, and pain shot up his damaged arm. The Helmor falling from his right hand. Shaking his head, he glanced up to see two Templars dismounting their monstrous beasts and bringing their swords up for the killing stroke. Ash looked to his Helmor, but it was out of reach, and there was no way he could get to it in time. This was it. This was death. Something changed in the older Templar's eyes. What had his name been? Cavour? That was right. Something changed in Cavour's eyes. The hatred and bloodlust was replaced by an echo of something Gabriel recognized. The second Templar was bringing his blade down onto Ash, now but froze, his eyes opening wide with shock. As Cavour's blade was pushed through his chest, pulling the blade out, Cavour turned to Ash and smiled. The mortally wounded Templar falling to his knees by his side. Even on the monstrous face, Ash recognized the mournful smile of Mirade.
I will always protect you from the darkness.
Her voice whispered from beyond the veil. Cavour's body collapsed to the ground. Unconscious or dead, Ash wasn't certain. He raised himself to his feet, regaining his Helmor, and surveyed the field. Drums were beating somewhere beyond the village, and the Templars were starting to retreat. Corpses, or those that would soon be corpses, thrashed and cried out in their death throes. Lutherans dying from wounds fell to their knees and bowed their heads in final prayer. Through the red haze of battle, Ash saw the heavy cavalry moving as one toward them. Another entire troop of Lutheran soldiers coming to their aid. Gunfire echoed the field as retreating Templars exchanged the last volleys of fire with the Lutherans still standing. They had won. The Lutherans had avenged the death of their kin. Ash stared grimly at the corpse of his beloved. They had won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like death. Mutant Chronicles Fiction. The Lutheran Triad. Kin of Ash.